I did it. I got through all the boring prerequisite stuff, which means I can start with the real stuff in Quizbowl 101, meaning we can start reading books. So today we'll be reading I got all the classics here. I got Tale of Two Kitties, Lord of the Fleas, For Whom the Rolls, just all the books you read in school. Let's check out A Crime and Punishment. I do love good Russian classic from Dostoevsky. There's a lot more diaper humor in this book than I remember. But oh well, we can move on to some American stuff instead. So without further ado, I'm Lodrin, you're a bunch of nerds, and welcome to Introduction to American Literature Novels. Today, we're going to be reviewing what is, in my opinion, the 10 most essential novels you have to learn for middle school and early high school Quizbowl. Now, this list is my own opinion. Some of them you will disagree with. I will address some other books that I would consider putting on this list as I get to them. And right here, I will do a first spoiler warning. I'm going to be doing a quick plot description of all of these books. I think 4 or 5 of these you definitely do not want spoiled. Once we get to some of the later ones, spoilers aren't a huge deal. But you'll just click off. I'll put chapter markers down below. Just click off for any books you don't want spoiled. If you've already read a book, I still would suggest listening to it as I talk about a lot of the very specific details that often pop up in Quizbowl. I have been doing this for 6 years now. I have seen hundreds of questions on just these 10 novels alone, which is pretty crazy. Just learning these 10 American books will give you a pretty good understanding, especially at the middle school level, and allow you to buzz on almost all of these toss-ups. So our very first novel is The Scarlet Letter. While we do this, I will just be pulling up Wikipedia pages, maybe other important details. Now, The Scarlet Letter is one of the most important novels ever created in America, and you most likely will read it in school at some point. If you care about spoilers, there's definitely quite a few that I will give, so move on to the next section, but I'm just going to give a quick plot description. I'm not going to go into everything, but I will give the very basics. There are 3 key characters we have to know. The first is Hester Prynne. The second is her former husband, she unwillingly married, named Roger Chillingworth. And the third is the local preacher. This is Arthur Dimmesdale. These 3 characters are the core of this novel. The basic plot is that Hester is married to Roger, doesn't like it. So when Chillingworth leaves, she has an affair with Arthur Dimmesdale. And then the public wants to execute her, as is the custom at the Puritan times. However, they don't because they realize that, Roger Chillingworth has been away for so many years. So instead, they force her to wear the Scarlet Letter, which is the name of the novel, which is just a big A on her chest, A for adultery, that she has to wear for the rest of her life. Roger Chillingworth comes back, sees her with the A, doesn't blame her, but now he wants revenge on Dimmesdale, or whoever is the affair partner, because he does not yet know. So the rest of the novel details Hester and her daughter Pearl trying to grow up while they are ostracized from society, and then Arthur Dimmesdale wrestling with his guilt, and Roger Chillingworth slowly destroying himself as he tries to destroy Dimmesdale. So after Chillingworth finds out that Dimmesdale is the guy who Hester had an affair with, obviously he wants revenge. He starts to emotionally torture, somewhat physically torture Dimmesdale. Dimmesdale's having a really rough time, and the way the novel ends is Hester and Dimmesdale plan to run away together, go off on ship. I believe they're going to go to England, but instead, Dimmesdale's having so much guilt, Chillingworth is not leaving him alone. Dimmesdale goes up on the scaffold, which is this big central place in their town that everyone can see. He rips open his shirt. It is implied that he has an A on his chest as a sign of his guilt, and basically he admits to everyone that it was me, I was a partner, and then he falls over dead. And as such, Roger Chillingworth, whose whole life was destroying Dimmesdale, has nothing left to live for, and he also dies. So the novel is a sad ending because both of these characters die. Hester and Dimmesdale romance, which you somewhat cheer for, never fully comes to fruition. But that's the basic plot of one of the most important novels of all time. But obviously, I'm missing a ton of details there. You're not going to get many buzzes from this. So what's more important is I will give things that you will commonly see. This novel, because of how famous it is, there are 4 characters from it that could be the answer to toss-ups. Most novels do not have this. You'll see questions about Hester Prynne wearing the Scarlet Letter. She became a seamstress. You'll see questions about her going up to the scaffold in the middle of the night. You will see questions about Chillingworth, how he was a physician, how he was obviously trying to destroy Dimmsdale. You might also see similar questions about Dimmsdale, on his affair. You'll see stuff about his preaching and what he preached. You'll see questions about that. And then finally, you'll see questions where the answer is Pearl. It will talk about her innocence. It will talk about how she was ostracized from the other children. And it will also mention other important details from the Scarlet Letter. So these 4 characters could all be asked about. And the Scarlet Letter, along with the book itself, there are 2 other things that I have seen pop up as answers. The first is the letter itself. The final line of the novel is on a field sable, the letter A gules. If you want to learn what this means, look up some of those words. You don't really need to look them up, but know if you hear that line, it is definitely talking about the letter A itself because it was put at Hester Prynne's grave at the end of the novel. And then the scaffold I have seen pop up. I'm actually going to go to a QB reader real quick. Look at scaffold. If you ever see scaffold come up in question, there, if it's a proper noun, see like here, in this question here, this is not a proper noun, scaffold. But if you ever see it come up in a literature context, real quick, if I put categories just literature, I can almost guarantee you that every time scaffold will be talking about, here's scaffold in the Scarlet Letter. Interesting, that's rare. You'll see scaffold and a question about Nathaniel Hawthorne. By the way, I didn't even mention the author. Nathaniel Hawthorne's the author. This was written in 1850, one of the earliest famous American novels. Mistress Hubbins and a scaffold, Scarlet Letter. Scaffold, Scarlet Letter. You'll see these all pop up quite a lot. 2 more things I want to mention. A common clue you'll see is the first chapter of the Scarlet Letter is like it's called the Customs House. That's just an important thing to know. And then a meteor in the sky is something that happens in the novel where it leaves a big A in the sky as a clue to Hester Prynne's guilt. That is another thing that I see pop up quite frequently. But other than that, that's the Scarlet Letter. Read it yourself. Look up more details than me. I just gave you the very basics that will help you get a few buzzes on Scarlet Letter. We're going to move on to the second novel, which is, I realize now I didn't actually look it up online, but second novel is Moby Dick. I'm going to bring this up. It was written in 1851 by Herman Melville, or at least that's when it's released. I'm actually not going to fully try with the Moby Dick because what I'll say about this is I've seen questions about Moby Dick pop up in competitions at least 30 times, which is crazy as I've only ever played like 20 to 25 tournaments. Like you're going to have a question every tournament about Moby Dick or something related to Melville. This is super famous. However, every single time, without fail, new details pop up. New things come up that I can't possibly teach you. I'd say the only way to consistently buzz in power on Moby Dick is to read the novel and get a deep understanding of it. For me, I'm not going to commit that amount of time to Moby Dick, but it is something you should probably do. So instead, I'm just going to give a few basic details that I can give. I'm not going to do a full plot summary. The basic idea is Ishmael, the main character, he joins a boat with Captain Ahab, who is hunting his white whale, which is, his white whale is Moby Dick. Moby Dick is a whale. Eventually, Moby Dick, I believe, kills Captain Ahab. I haven't read a summary in a while, but he kills Captain Ahab. A few other things to know is there's this first mate. Another person on board Captain Ahab's ship is Queequeg. It's spelled Queequeg, I believe. He's a harpooner who Ishmael somewhat becomes friends with. And then there's also a coffin. I believe the coffin's for Queequeg or something, but a coffin will also pop up frequently in Moby Dick. So Ishmael, Captain Ahab, White Whale, Queequeg, and Coffin. Oh, and then the name of the ship. I'll just look up the name of the ship real quick. The Pequod. So Queequeg and Pequod sound similar, but they sail around on the ship, the Pequod. Remember that as well. If you know these details, you'll at least be able to get these questions near the end. If you want to get questions in power for Moby Dick, you really have to read the novel. I'm going to give an example. Might as well. We have time. We go back up to the top here. Sorry. And we type in Moby Dick. Actually, might not come up because I need the... No, here we go. Here, see, for example, here. This object is described as red hell, material counterpart, man's monomaniac soul. This sort of stuff you really can't learn from a plot description. There are just so many random details in this novel that are going to keep popping up. This character's appearance shadows forth the heartless void. It's like, how are you going to buzz on that? You simply have to have a deep understanding of the novel. It's going to take a while. I can't really help more than that. But what I can help with is our next novel, which is Louisa May Alcott in 1868 released Little Women. This novel is actually kind of two parts. Technically, it's Little Women and then Good Wives, which is a sequel. But these two novels are usually combined into one, and they tell one pretty much continuous story. The story is interesting. It's a lot of different things, a bunch of different plot lines. The main idea is it's following the four sisters, Meg, Jo, Amy, and Beth. It's following these four as they grow up in the American prairie, and it follows their romance, their jobs, it follows their experiences. We'll start with Jo. Jo is an aspiring writer. She goes to New York, I believe, to write more. She actually rejects a marriage proposal from, who'd she reject it from? She rejects Laurie's marriage proposal and instead marries an older man named Professor Baer. He comes up a lot. That would be Professor Bhaer. He will often be in these clues. Other important sisters, Beth's pretty important. She eventually dies of scarlet fever. She contracts it in Little Women, then dies of it in Good Wives. That's really important. A clue I see a lot is breakfast for the Hummels. That is how the novel starts, with them visiting the Hummels and giving them breakfast, I believe. And then a couple other things. There are some more sequels, like one about there's a sequel about Laurie. Who does Laurie marry? Laurie marries one of the sisters, I believe, after getting rejected. All right, sorry, I have some notes written here, but they definitely didn't include everything I want to talk about. After Laurie is rejected by Jo, he instead marries Amy, and they have a daughter who they name after Beth, who is a sister who died of scarlet fever. If you see anything about Jo, Meg, that will often Beth, that will often be about Little Women. They're the March sisters. Their last name's March. Knowing Louisa May Alcott is also pretty important, because if it's a question that she's the answer to, well, her only real famous novel is Little Women and its sequels, so you can also get clues about Louisa May Alcott. And that's about all I can give. There's definitely a lot more to this novel, but it's a bunch of unconnected stories in many senses, and like just random occurrences, so there's not one unified plot necessarily. So we're just going to move on to Huckleberry Finn, written in 1884-ish. The date's not exactly set, by Mark Twain. Mark Twain is a really important American author to know. I don't know why I looked up 1884. Huckleberry Finn. We'll just look up the character himself, just so I can show. Huckleberry Finn, he comes from the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which is a sequel to the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which is Mark Twain's first and less famous novel. Some important things from Huckleberry Finn. It's also a bunch of unconnected stories, as many novels of this day were, but they do somewhat connect in a plot where Huckleberry Finn lives with his he lives with the widow Douglas to start, but then his pap takes him, and he lives in an abusive house with his dad, who he calls Pap. So he decides he wants to get out of there, so he fakes his own death with pig's blood, makes it look like he was killed, and he sails off down the river. On the river, he meets a slave named Jim. I believe his name's Jim, right? Yep, his name's Jim. He meets Jim, they start sailing together, they form a really tight friendship. But for Huck Finn, who just grew up knowing slavery and how black people should be feared, he struggles a lot with what he thinks is morality. He thinks morality is returning Jim to his slave owner, but he has to deal with that because he has to make his own decision where he realizes, oh wait, no, I shouldn't send him back to slavery. So he actually doesn't. He makes the moral decision there. However, what's worse is the end of the novel. The main plot line is that Jim gets captured. He's being held in a basement, and Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn are trying to get him out of there. However, Tom Sawyer has a lot of dreams in his head of grandeur and knighthood. He's a very romantic sort of idealist person. So his idea of a prison escape has to go exactly like the books do. Jim has to have these imaginary friends. Jim has to escape in this exact way. And this really messes with Huck Finn, because instead of doing the moral thing, which is what he's doing the rest of the novel by helping Jim, at this point it's kind of tough because he's now keeping a slave in a place where he might get sent back to slavery just to play along with Tom Sawyer's dreams of grandeur. So that's a little sad, but that's pretty much how the novel ends. Eventually they do escape, and it turns out that Jim's former owner set him free anyway. Some important things for this. At one point, Huck meets the Duke and the Dolphin. I think Dolphin, it might not be pronounced that way, but the Duke and the Dolphin are scammers. They pretend to be like royalty, and they have a traveling show, and they basically steal money from people. Other important things in the book, the Shepherdsons and the Grangerfords are kind of like a Romeo and Juliet story, except there's no love, really. They're just warring families like the Montagues and Capulets. They're warring families that Huck gets in between. I would say it's actually important to remember their names, Shepherdsons and Grangerfords. I have seen many a bonus about Huck Finn be, the first one's like, this novel contains a boy faking his death with pig's blood. You answer Huckleberry Finn. Then there's a question about the author being Mark Twain. And then the third question is going to be a much harder question, often about a particular instance in the novel, and I've many a time seen it be the Shepherdsons and the Grangerfords, and you actually need their names to get the points on that. So that's just a way to possibly get 30. Other important things, Aunt Sally's another caretaker of Huckleberry Finn. Tom Sawyer, we could go into his own novel. I'll just give a couple details about him. He's most famous probably for the fence story, where in the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, he's forced to paint a fence for his caretaker, and he's painting it, and he makes it look so fun, he makes it look so enjoyable, that all the other boys in the town bring him trinkets and money and bring him little gifts just so they can have a chance to paint the fence. So now he has to do no chores, and he gets a bunch out of it because he's really crafty like that. In many ways, if you read the Great Bear Brain books, Tom Sawyer is very similar to that. There's so much more about Huckleberry Finn. I'd say Huck Finn, Moby Dick, Scarlet Letter, The Great Gatsby, and The Catcher in the Rye are the 6 most famous American novels. All 6 of these are really hard for me to give you all the details because there's so many different things that NAQT could ask you about these, but I hope that's a good enough summary for now. We'll move on to The Great Gatsby, which was written in 1925 by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If you don't know anything about this book, you really should. First of all, you should read it. Huge spoiler warning here, as nearly every school in the country has this as required reading, I believe. But if you haven't read it or you don't care about spoilers, here's the plot description. It centers on a love relationship. Basically, Jay Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan fell in love when they were young. Gatsby's poor, he went off to war, while Daisy's very rich. So Daisy back home marries Tom Buchanan, a somewhat abusive husband, who our main character, Nick Carraway, who we follow as a narrator, he knows Tom Buchanan. However, he's actually not a part of the love triangle. So anyway, Daisy is with Tom, but begins to have an affair with Gatsby instead. Now this is interesting because while this is happening, Tom Buchanan is having an affair with Myrtle Wilson, who is just a local woman. So he's having an affair with her. And what eventually happens is Tom finds out about the affair between Daisy and Jay Gatsby. They have this big fight about it. So angrily, they drive away. Daisy is no longer really in love with Gatsby, but she asks to drive. And now she's driving Gatsby's yellow car. She goes too fast because she's angry. She runs right over Myrtle Wilson, who actually thought it was Tom Buchanan, her affair partner, in the car. Myrtle dies. George Wilson gets really mad, obviously, because he thinks the person that ran over Myrtle is also the person Myrtle is having an affair with. And so Tom Buchanan tells George that the yellow car with which Myrtle was run over with belonged to Jay Gatsby. So Wilson goes to Gatsby's mansion because he's super rich, shoots him in the head, and then kills himself. And that's how the novel ends, with Nick Carraway going to his funeral. So it's a bit of a depressive ending. It's a very interesting novel because it somewhat shows the joys of capitalism, as it shows how through capitalism Nick Carraway Gatsby was able to get rich, and Gatsby's kind of the hero of the novel. He's definitely better than Tom and Daisy, and he's able to make all this money even though he doesn't have generational wealth. However, it's also a critique of capitalism, as it shows a lot of the frivolity of the rich living, shows how they're not really happier, they're not better, they're just richer. And it's during this time, obviously this was right before the Great Depression, but there's still a lot of this idea that, this might end badly soon. So it's almost a prediction of the Great Depression. That's not super important for Academic Challenge, just interesting details about the novel. Some details you definitely need to know is, along with what I'd say are the 4 main characters of Nick, Daisy, Tom, and Jay Gatsby. Remember the two Wilsons. Myrtle Wilson is who Tom's having the affair with. George Wilson owns a shop, and he eventually kills Gatsby himself. You need to know Jordan. She is cheating. She's a cheating tennis star. She has no problem with lying. She ends up dating Nick for much of the novel, but leaves him by the end. Meyer Wolfsheim rigged the World Series, the 1918 World Series, I believe. That's an important detail you'll see asked about. And then the final thing I see asked about a lot in Great Gatsby Clues is the eyes of Eckelberg, I believe, T.J. Eckelberg or something. These will pop up quite a lot if we go to Great Gatsby and we put this in as answer. Oh, I have to actually click search. And we check out what is about this. You'll see a lot of these clues I wasn't even able to talk about just because of how many different clues there could be about the Great Gatsby. Here's one about Gatsby's house. Here's one about the ending passage of the Great Gatsby. You really do need to study this novel, learn all about it. Let's look up Eckelberg. Yes, T.J. Eckelberg. You see it pops up 4 times just in these 25 questions. T.J. Eckelberg, they're on a big billboard up in the slums in New York City. That's an important clue. It's kind of a contrast between how rich the people in East and West Egg are, which is like Jay Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, versus the people like the Wilsons, who are just barely making it more close to New York City. And then the other most important thing is the green light. Before Jay Gatsby meets Daisy Buchanan, he looks across the water at her house, sees the green light on her dock, and feels a sense of magic from that. So that's something you'll see. But other than that, read this. It is the most famous American novel of all time, I think. So it's definitely something you need to read. Now we're going to move on to The Catcher in the Rye, which is written by, who wrote it? J.D. Salinger in 1951. It is a coming-of-age-ish novel about the main character, a guy named Holden Caulfield. He's going on a bunch of misadventures as he runs away from his school, Pensy Prep? Let me check. Yeah, Pensy Prep. I can't give all the details. This is similar to something like Moby Dick or Little Women, where it's going to be so many unique details, unique stories. The best way to learn about it is to either read the book, which many of you will do in school, or just answer many, many questions about Catcher in the Rye until eventually you have a good enough understanding where you can get it. A few details I can give you is Pensy Prep. He leaves. He helps somebody cheat while at Pensy Prep. He has a sister named Phoebe. If you see a sister named Phoebe, that's probably talking about Holden Caulfield. She rides a carousel at one point. That's something I see a lot. The one thing I'll say about Catcher in the Rye is it's pretty popular in schools, but there's a good chance you haven't read it yet. And if you haven't, it's really hard to answer questions on. I definitely do struggle with it. So if you're not reading it in school, definitely read it on your own. And then the last thing I'll say is many of the questions about the Great Gatsby will not be, about Catcher in the Rye are not about the novel itself, but rather these will be about the main character that is Holden Caulfield. So you have to remember his name as the answer. Sometimes you'll be like, oh, I know that's the main character from The Catcher in the Rye, but you just can't think of who it is in your head. So if you struggle with that, just always remember Holden Caulfield, super important. And we're going to move on to our last 3 books. These last 3 books are a bit of stranger choices from me. They might not all be the most famous American novels, but I think they're all frequent enough in academic challenge lore that you need to know them. The first is Fahrenheit 451, written in 1953 by Ray Bradbury. This is actually just a good book. It's really short. You should read this, but I'm going to give you the plot summary. Guy Montag's the main character. He's in a dystopian world where books are illegal, and he's a fireman. But instead of putting out fires like our firemen do, he makes fires on houses that are found to have books. He drives around with his team on something called a salamander, which is like a fire truck, except instead of hoses, they have flamethrowers. And the beginning of the novel starts with him in his life. He's burning up people's houses. These people love books, but they're not allowed to own them because of the government. He meets this girl named Clarice, and Clarice, while it's never explicitly said, is somebody who still lives in the past. She enjoys books. Guy's conversations with her really open his eyes, and then she eventually dies, and he really sees how meaningless life is in this dystopian world, so he begins to doubt things. Now, his wife is super obsessed with all the futuristic technology. She has seashell earbuds. She talks to parlor walls, which are like advanced TV screens. She's all about the government, and she doesn't like books. So when Guy Montag starts collecting books, he's been collecting books for a while, but he hasn't read them. When he finally starts to read them, she is really freaked out. One important instance of this novel is she has friends over, and he starts reading the poem Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. It's a really famous poem, but she gets really freaked out, yells at him to stop. And eventually he does stop, but that's one of the first instances of them really growing apart. Eventually what happens is Guy Montag's police chief, Captain Beatty, it's spelled Beaty, so some people pronounce Beatty. It actually might be Beatty. But he burns down Guy Montag's house, and Guy Montag's on the run now. So he's running, he meets with this guy who does enjoy books, who's part of the secret organization. He shares with him the Bible, he shares with him other important books, and tells him to get out of the city. So Guy Montag runs away, and once he's out of the city, he finds a fire with people around it. These people have all run away because they enjoy books. They are part of a secret organization sort of thing, led by a guy named Granger, and they've all memorized a bit of the Bible. So they ask Guy Montag what he has memorized. He knows some of Ecclesiastes and some of Revelation, and the novel ends with Guy Montag's city getting completely destroyed by a nuclear bomb because the war is beginning across all of the world. He knows his wife is dead. He just doesn't care, and it leaves off right at that sad note. This novel is quite frequent to pop up, I would say, at a middle school level, because it's a more appropriate novel, so they expect you to maybe have read it in middle school. Some important details from it. There's one point where he's talking about the sieve in the sand, how like sand falls straight through a sieve. That comes up in clues a lot. As I mentioned, the salamanders are their fire trucks. There's this guy named Faber. He's the guy who he meets with, who likes books before he leaves the city, not Granger, the other one. Their parlor walls I mentioned. The seashell earbuds both are part of his wife's life. And if you just read the book or just understand the basic plot, you'll be able to get a bunch of easy clues. There will be clues about the title. The title is called Fahrenheit 451 because that is the temperature at which paper burns, which is obviously a big theme in the novel. This won't come up as much as our last 7 novels, but this will pop up a bit. We have 3 novels left. I was wrong, my bad. Our next novel is Catch-22, which was written in 1961 by Joseph Heller. This is a strange inclusion for me because I'd say of all the novels on this list, this one's been read by the least amount of people. But NAQT absolutely loves this book. Let me show you something. If I go to Frequency List, which is a thing on QB Reader, obviously this is not NAQT's official ones, but if I go to American Literature and then go to high school, obviously your first 2 are authors, Nathaniel Hawthorne and Sylvia Plath, but your third one with 66 questions on this website is Catch-22. And I think Catch-22 pops up so much because it's more of like the deep cut literature that NAQT and other question writers want you to know. So this is definitely something important. The idea of the novel is it's about John Yossarian. John Yossarian is part of a bombing unit, he's a pilot in World War II on an island in the Mediterranean. The reason it's called Catch-22, this is a phrase you may have heard, where your option's like 2 tough things, there's really no way out. Well, the reason for this is because in the novel, the soldiers obviously want to leave, so they try to plead insanity. But anybody who pleads insanity in order to leave the island is clearly smart. They're clearly within their own mind, because if you're pleading insanity, then obviously, why would you want to leave? Because, well, it's sort of a satire, but if you're trying to leave the island, that's a smart thing to do, therefore you can't be insane. The insane people are the people who stay on the island. But if you're staying on the island, clearly you're not leaving. So basically there's no way for any of the soldiers to leave under Colonel Cathcart, who's kind of the guy who does this. Yes, it's a silly concept, but this is important to know. Other important characters, there's Doc Danica. He's the doctor for the soldiers. There's Major. His parents named him Major, and his last name was Major, and he's promoted to Major in the Army. That's just a fun little detail, but you'll see that pop up sometimes. Other important things in the novel, you'll see one person ran away. His name was Orr, but you'll hear something about deserting the military in a novel. There's a good chance it's Catch-22. Other keys, this is pretty random. One man is naked in a tree at the funeral of another man. One guy says, "I'm cold," as he dies. That's in almost every Catch-22 clue if we want to look at one. And then 7-cent eggs for 5 cents. This is something that might not pop up, but if you remember 7-cent eggs for 5 cents, well, there are like a good amount of clues on this website that the answer is Catch-22, and that's the first line. Catch-22, if you learn it well, is one of the novels I think is easiest to power on because it's lesser known, so the clues aren't as difficult. So if you are able to do that, that would be great. Let me just look up Catch-22, and we'll look at a few other clues. Should probably put the answer in. Remember Joseph Heller as well. He's not a super famous author, so remembering him as the author of Catch-22 is important. Let's find... Oh, yep, here it is. Eggs that are bought for 7 cents each and sold for 5 cents each. Let's look that up again. Eggs in Power. Where else can we look? Look, 9 different instances. Buying eggs in Power. Eggs, that one doesn't have a power. Buying eggs just out of Power. So you'll see that just knowing the eggs fact will help you get stuff just out of Power. I'll say at a middle school level, this novel is not going to pop up as much, but as easy high school level, I have seen this novel numerous times competing on Invitational series, the novice versions. We have 2 novels left. Next up we have To Kill a Mockingbird, written in 1960 by Harper Lee. If you haven't read this novel, I don't think you go to a public or private school. You probably are homeschooled. But To Kill a Mockingbird is commonly read across schools, super popular. I will give a brief plot description. It's a rather long book, so you should probably go to Wikipedia, find a longer plot description. But our main character is Scout Finch. Her dad, Atticus, is a lawyer. She has a brother named Jem and a friend named Dill. We'll talk more about them later. But the idea of the novel is not about Scout, really. It's more about Atticus as he struggles to defend a black man named, what's his name? Sorry. Tom Robinson. He's defending Tom Robinson because people believe that Tom Robinson did some things to a girl named Mayella Ewell, and her dad, Bob Ewell, was actually the person who beat her up and stuff, but they don't know that, and the white jury basically will not listen to Atticus's evidence. He has all the facts laid out. He has it all clear that Tom Robinson could not possibly have done this. But being the time period it's set in, and because it's an all-white jury, Tom Robinson is found guilty anyway and is sentenced to die. He doesn't die from execution, rather he dies as he's trying to escape prison the next night. But this novel is really about trying to show racism in the post-slavery South and show how it affected people and especially the justice system. The only other thing I'll say about the plot is after this whole lawyer stuff, one night Scout is going to a play dressed as a ham, and on her way back with her brother Jem, they are attacked by Bob Ewell, who is the father of the prosecutor in the criminal case. But he tries to attack them. His goal is to kill them because he is a very messed up man. But Boo Radley, the mysterious neighbor of the Finches, who no one has ever seen before, everybody thinks he's some sort of monster. Well, he comes out in the middle of the night, saves the Finches, and kills Bob Ewell. We don't know if it's on purpose. We don't know if Jem's the one who did it, but we do know that he dies from it. So that's just the important way that the novel ends. I'll go over the characters real quick. Atticus Finch is a lawyer. I've seen him frequently. He comes up on Jeopardy a lot, which is fun. But he's a very important character to know. He's a lawyer. He's a very upright man. At one point, he shoots a dog who has rabies in order to save everybody else on the street. Scout is our main character. We hear a lot of her thoughts. We hear a lot of her thoughts as she experiences life, experiences racism. Not against herself, but she goes to a black church, sees what their service is like. She meets one man who everybody thinks is insane and drunk because he has an interracial marriage, which was not a thing that was frequent at that time. And she goes to him, realizes he's not drunk. He just pretends to be drunk because it's easier than dealing with the condescending stares that other white people give him because he married a black woman. That's an interesting instance. Mrs. Dubose is a character that Atticus Finch has Scout read to. even though she's really mean to Scout, it's almost an endearing relationship they have. Dill is not a super important character. He's a friend of Scout. What is important, he was based on Harper Lee, the author's real-life friend, Truman Capote. You might have heard Truman Capote before. Very, very famous author. But Dill is based on Truman Capote, so that's an important thing to remember. There are so many more details I'll give. I'll give a few here. Boo Radley lives next door, obviously. At one point, they try to send a letter to Boo Radley by putting it on a stick and like a fishing rod and like fishing it through the window. That's interesting. Calpurnia is the basic maid of Atticus, but Atticus is really, really nice to Calpurnia. She's not mistreated like many women of her status were at the time, so that's an endearing instance of Atticus. You'll see Calpurnia pop up in a lot of clues. And I think that's all I'm going to do for To Kill a Mockingbird for now. Every book on this list you should do more research on. I'm just giving the bare basics, but this book especially I do think you should read. I think it's a really good book. I think it's modern enough because it's 1960 that you're not really going to get lost in it like you will with Scarlet Letter or Little Women. So I do think this is an easy one you should read. If you're doing Quizbowl and you are assigned literature, definitely should read this. Then we have one final novel. This is definitely the weirdest pick for me on the list. I chose Beloved, a 1987 novel by Toni Morrison. Many of you have never even heard of this novel. I know that's a very weird pick for me. There is a reason I picked this. I think it pops up frequently enough that if there's a clue about Toni Morrison or if there's a clue about the novel itself, you can get it on both of those because it is by far the most famous work by Toni Morrison. I also picked it because at a high school level, this will be definitely a more difficult high school level, but it is something that pops up super frequently, is because Beloved is Toni Morrison's only super famous novel, while Steinbeck has Of Mice and Men and a couple others. So if there's a question about Toni Morrison, the clues will almost all be about Beloved. So let's learn Beloved real quick. I'm going to give as much plot description as I can. The reason it's not a middle school book, much of it is uncomfortable to talk about. I would rather not summarize it, but you can look it up itself if you're curious. The idea is that Seth, S-E-T-H-E, I pronounce it Seth, it might be Sethi. She is a woman who had a really tough past as she used to be a slave during the Civil War. She's now free, but she's still struggling with many of this past trauma. She goes to 124 Bluestone Road, a house in Ohio. She begins to live there, but while she's there, her dead daughter, named Beloved, becomes a ghost. Or it's not technically Beloved, but there's a ghost that resembles her dead daughter in the house. And as the novel goes on, the ghost is doing weird things. The ghost attempts to kill a white person with an ice pick because he looked like her old master. There's this man named Paul D who forms a relationship with the ghost. There's basically, I can't give a ton more detail once again because it's some very strange details, but how the novel kind of ends is we begin to learn more of Beloved's past, and we realize the reason that Seth is so haunted by Beloved, by the ghost, who she thinks is her former daughter, is because her daughter didn't die of natural causes. Her daughter died because she was going to get sold into slavery, and Seth, after living her life in slavery, wanted nothing to do with slavery for her daughter. So in an act of what she believes to be mercy, she killed her daughter at a very young age. That way she could avoid slavery. So it's definitely a dark, very dark book. Not very much a high school book. Many people, I'm sure, have not read it because it's very censored in many parts of the USA. But I do think it's still important to talk about. It will come up quite frequently in Quizbowl. We are going to scroll up and review. Oh wow, I really scrolled down. We're gonna look at Beloved, see some of the other clues that pop up frequently. But I do think it's important to learn, even though some of these books we're going to talk about in this series are very strange, they're very weird. Some of them have very outdated imagery, very outdated views. A lot of these authors were super racist. But I do think it's important that we look at every... Ooh, I forgot that there's another book. Kind of hard. Okay, here's one. Beloved, yes. So you'll see some clues here that I talked about, like Paul D. A woman shares a name with the daughter Seth killed to keep her from slavery. So basically, a clothed woman Oh yeah, that's right. I'm just remembering some of these details myself because I have never read the novel. I don't want to read the novel. I only know the basic plot. But after Paul D arrives, the woman shares the name with Seth's daughter, Beloved, which is why she's so confident that this Beloved is actually her daughter come back to life. But she's not right about that. She's just making that up. And then the final important detail, 124 Bluestone Road, have to remember this. That's where the novel takes place. It will pop up in bonuses and toss-ups and everything. I'm sorry I can't give you more about Beloved or Moby Dick or Little Women, but some of these novels just have so many details that are hard to talk about. They're too comprehensive, or they're just difficult topics to talk about on YouTube, or just uncomfortable topics. If you're really curious about these novels, I do suggest you do further research. All right, that's the 10 novels. That's it for now. These novels, as I've mentioned many times, you need to research more on. You need to be studying these frequently, know all the plots, know the characters, know the details. Pay attention when these pop up, as they will come up frequently over and over and over again. I'd say there's definitely a lot more to American literature than just these novels. There's a lot of poetry and a lot of authors. That's why I have split this particular lesson into 3 videos. Our next one will be about authors, and then we'll do another one about further studying, where I give you guys tons of tips, other American literature pieces that you need to study in order to better buzz on literature questions. But with that, I'm sorry about the visuals on screen for much of this video. It's hard to talk and give good commentary while at the same time being able to find accurate images on my computer that fit with this. If you need a further source to learn more about American literature, I would say do what I talked about in my Introduction to Literature video. Go on to QB Reader, answer an American literature question, then research it if you did not know the answer, like the back of your hand. And if you do that many, many times over, you'll begin to get better and better at literature. It's going to take a while. It's going to be a lot of work, but I know that you can do it because I've done it over these past 6 months. So with that, I will see you guys in American Literature Authors Edition.